My name is Daniel Carter, and at 38 years old, I came home to find my 8-year-old son Liam curled up on our porch, trembling and sobbing in the icy rain. But what hurt the most was that my own mother's silhouette turned away from the frosted glass door, and my sister Clara's faint laughter echoed from inside the house. They just left him there to freeze. What they didn't know was that hidden deep within the chaos of that night was a truth that would expose their deepest betrayal. How did I go from being the rock of my family to a desperate father fighting against the very people who should have protected us? It started not with a bang, but with a whimper, carried on the howling wind through the cracked windows of our suburban Portland home. I stumbled in at midnight, my boots soaked, each step squelching against the worn welcome mat. The cold gnawed at my bones, but a sharper chill pierced my chest when I saw him. Liam, my son. Just 8 years old, a tiny bundle on the front porch steps. He was curled tight, a thin jacket doing little against the relentless, biting wind and the icy rain that plastered his hair to his small forehead. His sobs were muffled, almost swallowed by the storm, but I heard them, a desperate, broken sound that tore through me. My heart lurched, a sickening lurch that felt like it would rip free from my ribs. For a second I couldn't move, a paralysis of pure disbelief gripping me. Liam, my Liam, out here, alone? The thought was a raw, burning ember in my gut. Then my body snapped into motion, an instinctual surge of paternal terror. I ran, my soaked boots sliding on the slick wood of the porch. Liam. My voice was a raw croak, barely audible above the storm. I scooped him up, his small frame impossibly light, trembling violently against my chest. His icy hands, tiny and fragile, clutched at my shirt, his fingers digging in with a desperate strength that spoke volumes. He was shivering, uncontrollably, his teeth chattering so hard I could feel the vibration through his small body. His breath hitched in ragged gasps against my neck. "Dad," he whispered, his voice thin, barely a thread of sound. "They wouldn't let me in." The words hit me like a physical blow, a fresh wave of ice spreading through my veins, colder than the rain. "They?" my mind screamed. Who else could it be but Mom and Clara? The rage started as a low, dangerous hum deep in my core, then rose, a roaring inferno threatening to consume me. My own mother, my sister, how could they? How could they stand by and let this happen? The question hammered against my skull, demanding an answer that I knew, even then, would be impossible to bear. My jaw clenched so tight it ached, a tremor running through my arms, not from the cold, but from the fury that surged within me. I held Liam tighter, burying my face in his damp hair, inhaling the faint, sweet scent of his shampoo mixed with the biting cold and the pervasive smell of wet earth. He was so small, so vulnerable, and the thought that they had left him exposed to this. It was an unforgivable sin. With Liam still clutched in my arms, I stumbled to the door, the flimsy, splintered wood suddenly feeling like an impenetrable barrier. I pounded on it, a rhythmic, desperate thud that echoed hollowly in the stormy night. Once, twice, 3 times. Each strike resonated with the escalating fury inside me. My knuckles stung, but I barely registered the pain. "Mom! Clara! Open the door!" My voice was hoarse, strained, a raw cry against the wail of the wind, but the door remained shut, an obstinate, cruel silence emanating from within. It was a refusal, a deliberate act of rejection. Through the frosted glass, distorted shadows danced. I saw it clearly, my mother's familiar silhouette, her back turned, moving away from the door, away from us. And then, faint but unmistakable, Clara's laugh. A light, careless sound that cut through the pouring rain and sliced deep into my already fractured heart. It was a sound of amusement, of indifference, echoing in the suffocating silence of their refusal. Something was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. This was deliberate. The way my mother's shadow had moved, the callous sound of Clara's mirth. It painted a picture of calculated cruelty, far beyond anything I could have imagined from my own family. My mind raced, trying to piece together a reason, any reason, for such a monstrous act. Was this some twisted punishment? For what? My thoughts were a whirlwind, chaotic and terrifying. I pressed my ear against the cold wood of the door, listening for any sign of movement, any hint of remorse. But there was nothing. Only the incessant drumming of the rain and the hollow echo of Clara's laughter in my ears. The porch light, usually a comforting beacon, seemed to mock us, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters around Liam and me. My fingers tightened on his small, shivering body, a protective instinct so fierce it almost choked me. As I held Liam closer, a chilling thought hit me, cold and sharp as the ice forming on the railings. Had they done this on purpose? Had my own family, the people who shared my blood, deliberately left my child out here to freeze? The idea was so monstrous, so unfathomable, yet it gnawed at me, a sickening suspicion taking root in the darkest corners of my mind. Why would they? Why would my own mother, my sister, commit such an act of unspeakable cruelty against a defenseless child, against their own nephew? The familiar suburban porch, usually a symbol of home and safety, now felt like a desolate, hostile landscape. The dimly lit interior of the house, once a source of comfort, now seemed to radiate an oppressive, terrifying cold. It was a betrayal so profound it threatened to shatter everything I thought I knew about my family, about my world. The rain continued its relentless assault, mingling with the tears I refused to let fall. I had to be strong for Liam. But the question remained, a tormenting whisper in the storm. How deep did this darkness go? The relentless thrum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the kitchen, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged just hours before. Liam, bless his resilient heart, was finally asleep on the worn couch, wrapped in a blanket that still carried the faint, metallic scent of rain. I sat at the chipped formica table, the harsh overhead light glinting off the damp rings my coffee cup had left. My mind kept replaying Clara's laugh, my mother's turned back. The image burned, a stark, ugly painting in the gallery of my memories. It wasn't just the cold indifference. It was the chilling calculation of it all. Who leaves an 8-year-old in a downpour? And why? The questions spun in my head, a dizzying carousel of disbelief and fury. My stomach churned with a nauseous dread, a familiar feeling that had settled deep within me since Liam's mother left us. But this was sharper, more corrosive. This was family. My family. The thought was a bitter taste in my mouth. I rubbed my temples, the dull ache in my head throbbing in rhythm with the unanswered questions. My carpentry business, small but steady, was all I had. Every penny was for Liam, for his future, for that fragile sense of security I desperately tried to build for us. I pushed myself up from the table, my joints stiff, the exhaustion weighing heavily on every limb. There was no time for rest, not when the air still felt thick with unresolved dread. The next morning dawned gray and oppressive, matching the turmoil in my soul. Liam, quiet and unusually subdued, clung to my hand as we rushed through the biting wind. The bank, a monolithic structure of cold marble and polished brass, loomed ahead, an ironic symbol of the security I now questioned. The air inside was sterile, hushed, the quiet hum of computers and hushed whispers creating an unnerving atmosphere. We approached the teller's window, a young woman with tired eyes and a forced smile. Her name tag read, Sarah. I pushed my withdrawal slip across the counter, my hand trembling slightly, a tremor I hoped she wouldn't notice. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, suffocating silence of the bank lobby. Sarah's smile faltered as she typed, her brow furrowing slightly. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then stilled. She glanced up at me, her face paling visibly, the forced smile replaced by a look of genuine alarm. My breath caught in my throat. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice barely a whisper, though it felt deafening in the quiet space. "Your account. It's been wiped. $927,000. It's gone." The world tilted. $927,000. Gone. The number hung in the air, impossibly large, impossibly absent. It wasn't just money. It was years of scraping, of early mornings and late nights, of every sacrifice I'd made for Liam. It was his future. It was our future. My jaw went slack. I stared at Sarah, then at Liam, who looked up at me, his small face etched with confusion and fear. My legs felt like jelly. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white, the cold marble doing nothing to anchor me. How? Who? The question screamed in my mind, displacing the earlier fury with a cold, hollow despair. I stumbled out of the bank, the crisp morning air doing little to clear the fog of shock. Liam's tiny hand in mine was the only thing grounding me. The phone felt impossibly heavy as I dialed Ethan's number. My brother-in-law. Always too charming, too slick. The phone rang twice, then his voice, annoyingly jovial, filled the line. "Dan, to what do I owe the pleasure?" My voice when it came was a tight, strained rasp. "My account. It's empty, Ethan. $927,000. There was a beat of silence on the other end, then a low chuckle, a sound that grated on my raw nerves. "Rough break, Dan," he said, the amusement clear in his voice. "Maybe you shouldn't trust banks. Big sums like that, they tend to disappear." His words, laced with an unsettling casualness, felt like a deliberate jab, a cruel mockery. I could almost picture his smug smirk, that self-satisfied tilt of his head he always wore when he thought he'd outsmarted someone. Clara, I knew, was likely listening on speakerphone. I could almost feel her presence, a silent accomplice in this sickening charade. Her continued silence, a heavy, suffocating blanket on the line, fueled the suspicion already simmering in my gut. They knew something, more than something. They were involved. It was a cold, hard certainty that settled in my bones, heavier than the rain-soaked clothes from last night. My fingers clenched around the phone, the plastic creaking under the pressure. How could they do this? The question, unspoken, hung in the air between us, a toxic accusation. Back home, the house felt even colder, more desolate than before. Liam was tucked away with a book, his small face still pale and quiet. I needed answers. I tore through my cluttered home office, a whirlwind of desperation and growing rage. Papers flew, drawers slammed open and shut, each frantic movement echoing the chaos in my mind. Dust motes danced in the sliver of weak sunlight that pierced the grimy window, illuminating the disarray. My desk, usually buried under carpentry sketches and supply invoices, became a battlefield of crumpled papers and forgotten files. I wasn't just searching for clues. I was searching for proof, for something, anything that could explain this nightmare. My hands, still trembling slightly, brushed against an old leather-bound folder tucked deep beneath a stack of unpaid bills. It was a relic, a forgotten tomb of financial records from years ago. I pulled it out, a faint plume of dust rising. Inside, nestled among canceled checks and faded bank statements, I found it, a transfer slip, dated 6 months ago. The amount was significant, but not enough to wipe me out. What froze me, what made the blood drain from my face, was the signature at the bottom, Ethan Brooks. It was unmistakable, his florid, confident scrawl. A direct transfer from my account to one of his shell companies, listed as a business investment. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. It wasn't just a random act. It was calculated, premeditated. This wasn't a bank error. This was theft. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My own family wasn't just cold. They were thieves. They'd stolen everything, every single dollar I'd painstakingly saved for Liam's future, for his therapy, for the stability he so desperately needed. The paper felt like a burning coal in my hand. Ethan's audacity, his casual mockery over the phone, suddenly made chilling sense. He wasn't just gloating about a random misfortune. He was gloating about his own handiwork. And Clara's silence, it wasn't just complicity. It was an active betrayal. My sister, my own flesh and blood, was in on this. I stared at the transfer slip, the numbers blurring, then sharpening into stark, undeniable proof. Who else was in on this, and why target me now? Was this about more than money? Was it about some twisted sense of dominance, a dark game Ethan was playing with our lives? The cold, sterile air of the office pressed in on me, a physical weight. The questions hung heavy in the air, unanswered, unsettling, promising more pain. I crumpled the transfer slip in my hand, the crisp paper protesting with a faint crackle. The soft light of afternoon faded, leaving shadows to creep across the room, mimicking the shadows that were rapidly engulfing my life. The crumpled transfer slip lay like a venomous snake on my desk, its stark black numbers screaming Ethan's name. Liam, oblivious, was humming a tune from a cartoon in the living room, his small voice a fragile melody against the storm brewing inside me. My gaze lingered on the slip, then drifted to the window. Outside, the gray Portland sky wept, a mirroring of the profound ache in my chest. The cold from last night seemed to have burrowed deep, chilling me to the bone, a constant reminder of Liam shivering on the porch. That image, the betrayal by my own mother, was already a raw wound. Now, this new revelation about Ethan felt like a fresh cut, deeper and more insidious. My thoughts drifted back, pulled by an invisible thread to last week. The memory surfaced unbidden, playing out like a hazy film in the cramped confines of my mind's eye. It was at my mother's house, the kitchen table cluttered with half-eaten pastries and lukewarm coffee. The air had been thick with the cloying scent of stale sugar and unspoken tensions. Clara was there. My sister, usually so boisterous, had been unusually subdued, her eyes darting nervously between Ethan and me. Ethan, on the other hand, was in rare form, his usual slick charm amplified, almost performative. He leaned back in his chair, a smug, self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips, while he regaled us with stories of his latest investment opportunities. His voice, usually a smooth hum, had taken on an irritatingly triumphant tone, and then Clara had spoken, her voice softer than usual, almost a whisper. "Family debts," she'd said, her gaze flickering to Ethan, then quickly away. The words hung in the air, a strangely ominous pronouncement. At the time, I'd dismissed it as typical family drama, another one of Ethan's shady dealings surfacing. But now, piecing it together with the transfer slip, it clicked into place with a horrifying precision. Family debts. Not their debts, but my money, siphoned off to cover Ethan's gambling habit, his insatiable need for the thrill of a risky bet. And Clara, my sister, who had always claimed to care for Liam, who had helped me braid his wild hair on rushed mornings, was complicit. She had been there, hinting at it, while Ethan wore that infuriating smirk. The realization was a punch to the gut, stealing my breath. The betrayal stung deeper than the cold that had settled in my bones. It was a searing, agonizing pain that eclipsed even the shock of the stolen money. My sister, Clara. The girl who had once shared secrets with me under the covers, who had giggled with me over silly childhood pranks. She had been a part of this. She had seen her nephew, my son, abandoned in the rain, and she had laughed. Her laughter. I could still hear it, a faint mocking echo from behind the frosted glass, mingling with the memory of her whispered family debts. How could she? How could the sister who used to shield Liam from Ethan's occasional bursts of temper now stand by or even participate, as he orchestrated a plan that would leave her own nephew vulnerable, almost destitute? The image of her carefully braided Liam's hair, her fingers gentle and swift, flashed in my mind, a cruel juxtaposition against the current reality. It was a hypocrisy so profound it made my stomach churn. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the heels of my hands against them as if I could physically push away the horrifying truth. My shoulders slumped, the weight of this fresh betrayal heavier than any burden I'd ever carried. The air in the room suddenly felt thick, suffocating, as if the very walls were closing in, mocking my misplaced trust. My hands, which had so recently clutched the incriminating transfer slip, now hung uselessly at my sides, devoid of purpose, trembling slightly with a mixture of anger and profound hurt. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand answers from a family that had become utterly unrecognizable. But Liam was here nearby, his innocent hum a fragile counterpoint to my inner turmoil. I swallowed hard, the dryness in my throat mirroring the arid landscape of my despair. Just as I felt myself sinking deeper into the mire of despair, a sharp buzz sliced through the quiet. My phone. It vibrated on the polished surface of the old wooden coffee table, a glowing rectangle of light in the dim room. My heart leaped, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. Who? My fingers fumbled, hesitant, before I finally picked it up. An unread message. From Clara. My breath hitched. My eyes scanned the words, sharp and cold, cutting through the thin veil of my fading hope. "Stop digging, Dan. It's for the best." The words resonated with an icy finality, a chilling confirmation of my worst fears. "Stop digging." Not, "I'm sorry," not, "let's talk." Just a cold, calculated warning, and it's for the best. Whose best? Certainly not Liam's, not mine. This wasn't a plea. It was a threat, cloaked in a thinly veiled attempt at concern. It confirmed everything. She wasn't just silent, not just complicit in Ethan's schemes. She was an active participant, fully aware, fully invested in keeping whatever dark secret they shared buried. My hands tightened around the phone, my knuckles turning white. The small screen seemed to pulse with a malevolent light, illuminating the depths of their deceit. The room seemed to spin, the familiar surroundings blurring into an unrecognizable landscape of betrayal. My head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat against my skull. What best could possibly justify stealing from her own nephew, leaving him out in the cold, and then threatening me when I dared to question it? The answer eluded me, lost in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about something far darker, a twisted web of family secrets and desperate measures. The chilling implication of her text, the implicit threat lurking beneath the surface of those seemingly simple words, sent a shiver down my spine. I was no longer just dealing with a thief. I was dealing with a conspiracy, and my own sister was at its heart. Clara's chilling text, "Stop digging, Dan, it's for the best," haunted my thoughts, a stark, unwelcome echo in the quiet of the house. It confirmed her complicity, solidifying the sickening feeling that had taken root in my gut. The air, even indoors, felt heavy with the weight of this new betrayal. Liam, curled up on the couch, now truly asleep, looked so small, so innocent. His soft, even breaths were the only comfort in a world that felt increasingly hostile. Every surface seemed to hum with unspoken questions, with the ghosts of lost trust. I ran a hand through my hair, the grit of exhaustion settling deep into my scalp. There had to be more. There had to be an answer, a way out of this suffocating trap. My gaze fell on the attic access panel in the hallway ceiling, a square of faded wood that usually went unnoticed. It hadn't been touched in years, not since Dad. A faint, musty scent, like old paper and forgotten wood, seemed to drift down from it. My father, a man of quiet habits and even quieter secrets, had kept that attic as his personal domain. A flicker of an idea ignited within me, fragile yet persistent. He had always been meticulous, organized to a fault, even with his clutter. If anyone could have left a breadcrumb trail, it would be him. My desperation, a cold, clenching hand in my chest, propelled me forward. I needed answers, something beyond the cold reality of Ethan's theft and Clara's deceit. The attic steps groaned under my weight, each creak a loud punctuation in the hushed house. The air grew thicker as I ascended, heavy with the scent of dust and aged wood, a tangible shroud of neglect. Cobwebs, like ghostly lace, clung to the exposed rafters, and the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling cast long, dancing shadows that distorted the familiar shapes of forgotten furniture and stacked boxes. It was a tomb of memories, a silent testament to a life lived and ended. My breath caught in my throat, a sudden wave of grief washing over me. Dad had been gone for 5 years, but in this space, his presence felt almost palpable. I began to tear through the boxes, a frantic energy coursing through me, overriding the exhaustion. Each box I opened was a dive into a forgotten past. Faded photo albums with stiff, yellowed pages, old carpentry tools Dad had favored, even some of my childhood drawings, crinkled and worn. Dust motes danced in the weak, ethereal glow of the single bulb, swirling like tiny, frantic ghosts. My hands, calloused from years of working with wood, moved with a practiced precision, sifting through the layers of accumulated history. There has to be something. My inner voice was a relentless whisper urging me on. The air grew colder, each breath I took stirring up more dust, coating my tongue with a gritty film. The silence in the attic was profound, broken only by the rustle of old papers and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath my shifting weight. Then my fingers brushed against something stiff, tucked away beneath a stack of old blueprints. It was a sealed envelope, thick and cream-colored, unlike the flimsy utility bills and junk mail that usually made up Dad's correspondence. My heart gave a sudden hard lurch. My name, for Daniel, was written across the front in his familiar, looping handwriting. It was an unmistakable script, a comforting sight that now sent a shiver of apprehension down my spine. This wasn't just any old letter. This was deliberate. My hands, suddenly clumsy, fumbled with the seal. The paper tore with a faint, brittle crackle that echoed loudly in the quiet attic. Inside, there was no long letter, no flowery prose, just a single crisp note, folded precisely in half. I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the familiar ink. "Protect what's yours. Look closer." No date, no formal salutation, just those cryptic words imbued with the quiet authority Dad had always possessed. My brow furrowed, a sense of confusion mixing with a burgeoning flicker of hope. Protect what's yours. Was he talking about Liam, our home, or something else entirely? Look closer. At what? The house? My life? Or was there something else, something hidden within his estate that Ethan had overlooked? The thought sent a jolt through me, a sudden rush of adrenaline. The note hinted at a will, or perhaps an amendment, something that could alter the landscape of what was mine. But there was no lawyer's stamp, no official seal, nothing to indicate it was a formal legal document. It was just a note, scrawled on plain paper, yet it carried the weight of a profound secret. Could this be it? My mind raced, trying to unravel the meaning behind his carefully chosen words. Was there more to Dad's estate? Something Ethan hadn't touched? Something he couldn't have known about? My father had been a man of modest means, a carpenter like me, but he'd also been shrewd, a quiet observer of human nature. He had seen things, knew things, the possibility, however faint, that he had foreseen something like this, that he had left a hidden safeguard, sent a thrill of cautious hope through me. The oppressive weight that had settled on my chest since Liam's abandonment began to lift, just slightly, allowing a sliver of light to penetrate the darkness. I clutched the note, the rough texture of the paper pressing into my palm. My breath hitched, a sudden desperate gulp of the dusty attic air. What secrets did Dad leave behind, and can they save us? The question hung in the silence, heavy and unresolved. The note was a fragile thread, a lifeline thrown into the turbulent waters of my despair. It was a hint, a whisper from the grave, and it promised a fight. I stared at the yellowed paper, my mind already racing, trying to decipher its hidden meaning. The dusty attic, once a place of quiet reflection, now felt like the threshold of a new, dangerous journey. My father's cryptic note, "Protect what's yours, look closer," still burned in my mind, a faint flicker of hope in the suffocating darkness that had enveloped my life. The suspicion gnawing at me, the unsettling feeling that Ethan had overlooked something in Dad's estate, was a constant thrum beneath the surface of my consciousness. Liam, thankfully, was still asleep, his innocent breathing a gentle rhythm in the quiet house. But the silence felt heavy, laden with unspoken threats. Clara's text, her chilling warning to stop digging, echoed in my ears, a stark reminder of the dangerous game I was playing. My hands still trembled slightly when I thought of her complicity, her cold betrayal. I knew I couldn't fight this alone. The following morning dawned gray and damp, typical Portland weather, mirroring the lingering gloom in my soul. Liam had woken with a cough, a dry, hacking sound that tightened my chest with worry. His small face was pale, his eyes listless. My first instinct was to rush him to the hospital, but a wave of nausea washed over me. The very place that was supposed to offer healing now represented a gaping hole in my life, the stolen $927,000, the money meant for his future, for his health. The thought was a bitter taste in my mouth, a constant reminder of Ethan's cruel theft. I dressed Liam carefully, his small body feeling fragile beneath my hands. The concern for his well-being eclipsed, for a moment, the overwhelming anger and betrayal. The drive to the hospital was a blur of muted greens and grays, the persistent drizzle blurring the lines of the road ahead. The sterile scent of disinfectant hit me as soon as we entered the hospital lobby, a stark contrast to the damp, earthy smell of the morning outside. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a cold, impersonal glow on the hurried faces of doctors and nurses. Liam whimpered slightly as I settled him into a plastic chair in the waiting room, his small fingers clutching the worn sleeve of my jacket. My gaze swept over the room, filled with the muted sounds of hushed conversations and the occasional cry of a child. Then I saw her. A familiar face, warm and unexpectedly comforting amidst the sterile anonymity of the hospital. Rachel Hayes, my old friend from school. She was a nurse, I remembered, her movements efficient and graceful as she moved through the busy waiting area. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, usually sparkling with an easy humor, were serious, observant. Our eyes met across the crowded room. A flicker of surprise, then immediate recognition crossed her face. She excused herself from a hushed conversation with a colleague and walked towards me, her steps light and purposeful. "Daniel?" she asked, her voice soft, laced with a familiar warmth that instantly put me at ease. She knelt beside Liam, her expression softening even more. "Hey there, little guy. What brings you two here?" I explained Liam's cough, the persistent worry in my voice while she checked his temperature with a practiced hand. Then her eyes met mine again, and the warmth was replaced by a look of profound concern, a silent acknowledgement of the deeper turmoil she sensed in me. She led us to a quieter corner of the waiting room, a small cluster of chairs tucked away from the main thoroughfare. The air here was less frantic, the humming of the lights a softer drone. "I heard," she began, her voice low, almost a whisper, her gaze darting cautiously around the room as if worried about eavesdroppers. "About everything, your account, Ethan." My jaw tightened. News traveled fast in a small city like Portland, especially news of scandal. She paused, then leaned closer, her voice dropping even further. "I overheard him, Dan. At the hospital last week. He was bragging about your money, about how easy it was to acquire it." A cold wave washed over me, a chilling confirmation of my darkest fears. So it wasn't just Clara. Ethan had been openly gloating about his crime. My hands clenched, my nails digging into my palms. Rachel reached into the pocket of her scrubs and pulled out a small, unassuming USB drive. It was plain black, no distinguishing marks. "I had a hunch," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "Ethan's always been careless when he's feeling triumphant. I recorded him. He was on the phone talking to someone, laughing about easy cash and how you wouldn't see it coming." She pressed the small drive into my hand, her fingers brushing mine, a fleeting touch that felt like an anchor in the storm. Her steady gaze held mine, unwavering, a silent promise of support. A flicker of hope, hesitant but real, ignited within me. Back at my own dimly lit living room, the blinds drawn against the gray afternoon, I plugged the USB into my worn laptop. The familiar whir of the fan seemed impossibly loud in the hushed room. Liam was asleep in his bed, exhausted from his doctor's visit. The screen flickered to life, the desktop a jumble of icons and unfinished carpentry designs. My fingers trembled slightly as I navigated to the audio file. I clicked play. Ethan's voice, smug and self-satisfied, filled the quiet room, a chilling testament to his hubris. He was indeed bragging, his words confirming every suspicion, every painful truth. He spoke of the transfer, the meticulous way he'd orchestrated it, the confidence in his untouchability, the cold, calculating nature of his actions, laid bare by his own words, made my stomach clench. The recording mentioned a cloud account, a digital storage space he apparently used to keep his illicit dealings. My mind, usually focused on the tangible world of wood and tools, struggled to grasp the implications. If we could hack into it, if we could access that account, we would have indisputable proof. Not just a recording of his arrogant boasting, but the actual digital breadcrumbs, the transfers, the false documents, perhaps even the true destination of my stolen $927,000. But the thought of hacking into his system, of venturing deeper into his digital domain, sent a jolt of fear through me. Ethan was smart. He was cunning. He might notice. The risk was enormous. Could Rachel's help, this unexpected lifeline, truly turn this nightmare around? Or would attempting to hack his cloud account risk everything, exposing us to a new, even more dangerous level of his retaliation? The question hung heavy in the dimly lit room, an unresolved chord in the growing symphony of dread and cautious optimism. The quiet hum of Rachel's laptop and the faint glow of the screen had been a beacon of fragile hope in the dimly lit hospital waiting room. Ethan's voice, captured on that USB, bragging about easy cash, was chilling, a confirmation of his guilt that sent a cold knot of dread through me even as it offered a sliver of possibility. Rachel's steady gaze, her quiet support, had grounded me, making me believe for the first time in what felt like an eternity that we might actually have a fighting chance. The idea of hacking Ethan's cloud account, of exposing his digital footprints, was a risky gamble, a leap into the technological unknown. My heart had pounded with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. We were stepping into his world, a world of financial manipulation and hidden agendas, and I knew, instinctively, that he wouldn't take kindly to being exposed. The days that followed were a blur of nervous anticipation. Every phone call made my heart jump. Every car that slowed on our street sent a jolt of anxiety through me. Liam, still recovering, was often quiet, his eyes wide and watchful. The house, usually filled with the comforting sounds of my carpentry work, now felt like a holding pen, a place where we waited for the next shoe to drop. I found myself pacing, scrubbing phantom dirt from my hands, unable to shake the feeling of impending doom. The hope Rachel had offered felt fragile, easily shattered. I kept replaying Ethan's smug chuckle, his casual dismissal of my ruined life. He wouldn't just sit back and let us expose him. He was too cunning, too arrogant for that. Then it happened. The knock on the door was insistent, sharp, jarring me from the mindless task of folding Liam's small, soft clothes. My hand, halfway to pulling a clean t-shirt from the basket, froze. My stomach clenched. It wasn't the soft tap of a neighbor or the familiar quick rap of a delivery driver. This was different. This was authority. A deep, cold dread seeped into my bones. Liam, sensing my sudden tension, looked up from his toys on the living room floor, his innocent eyes wide with curiosity. I straightened, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in its cage. Every muscle in my body tensed, preparing for an unknown impact. I walked to the door, my steps heavy, each one dragging through a growing pool of apprehension. The cold dread had solidified into a heavy weight in my gut. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob, then forced myself to turn it. The door swung inward, revealing two figures silhouetted against the gray afternoon light. Police. My breath hitched. They were uniformed, their faces grim, their presence radiating an undeniable authority. My heart sank, a leaden weight pulling me down. "Daniel Carter?" one of them asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I could only nod, my throat suddenly dry, unable to form words. "We have a warrant for your arrest," the officer stated, his eyes scanning past me into the house, a chilling invasion of my sanctuary. "For fraudulent transfers." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. Fraudulent transfers. My mind reeled, trying to connect the dots. My money was stolen. I hadn't transferred anything. A wave of nausea washed over me, cold and clammy. Behind the officers, through the narrow gap in the doorway, I saw a familiar face on a flickering news broadcast playing on a small TV in their patrol car. Ethan. His face, usually so glib, was now set in a mask of concerned righteousness, his voice narrating a story of my alleged financial misdeeds. My stomach lurched. He was twisting the narrative, painting me as the villain. Panic, cold and sharp, coiled in my stomach, a viper striking. My savings, every penny I had, gone. Now my freedom? My hands, which had so recently clutched the hope of a hidden will, and Rachel's evidence, clenched into useless fists at my sides. A suffocating tightness gripped my chest, making it hard to breathe. Liam, hearing the raised voices and sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, scrambled to his feet. He ran to me, his small arms wrapping around my leg, his body trembling. "Dad," he whimpered, tears already welling in his wide, frightened eyes. His small face, usually so bright, crumpled in fear, and the sight of his distress tore at something primal within me. I knelt, my aching ribs protesting, and pulled him into a tight embrace, burying my face in his soft hair, trying to shield him from the harsh reality unfolding around us. The police station was a blur of sterile white walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, and the metallic tang of stale coffee. The air hummed with the quiet urgency of official business, a stark contrast to the chaotic storm raging inside me. They took my fingerprints, asked questions I could barely answer, my mind still reeling from the shock. They sat me down in a small, windowless room, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and unspoken accusations. A detective, his face impassive, pushed a stack of documents across the table. They were bank statements, transaction logs. My name was everywhere. But these weren't transfers I had authorized. Then, the detective pointed to a line item, a large sum transferred to a shell company. "This transfer originated from your IP address, Mr. Carter," he stated, his voice flat, his eyes piercing. "From your home network, your laptop specifically." My blood ran cold. My IP address, my laptop. A horrifying realization slammed into me, a chilling, sickening wave. Ethan. He hadn't just stolen my money. He had framed me. He had used my own equipment, my own digital footprint to make it look like I was the perpetrator. The audacity, the sheer, ruthless cunning of it stole my breath. He wasn't just a thief. He was a master manipulator, twisting reality, turning my life into his twisted game. The evidence was damning, meticulously crafted to implicate me. He had thought of everything. The anger, momentarily dulled by shock, flared back with a vengeance, hot and bitter. My jaw clenched so tight it ached, a tremor running through my body. The bars of the small holding cell, cold and unyielding, felt like the final agonizing culmination of Ethan's cruel design. My savings gone, my reputation in tatters, and now my freedom taken, all while Liam was left at home, probably wondering where his dad had gone. How could I fight back from behind bars? The question echoed in the suffocating silence of the cell, a desperate, unanswered plea. The heavy door, solid and unyielding, felt like a final, crushing blow, sealing my fate in a world where Ethan pulled all the strings. The sterile scent of the police station, a blend of disinfectant and stale coffee, still clung to my clothes, a phantom reminder of my humiliation. Being released on bail was a temporary reprieve, not a victory. Liam's frightened eyes, his small body trembling as the officers led me away, were seared into my memory. Ethan's smug face on the news, his voice dripping with feigned concern, played on a loop in my mind. He had woven a web of deceit so intricate, so convincingly, that I was trapped, powerless. My savings gone, my freedom hanging by a thread, and now my very name dragged through the mud. The sheer audacity of his frame-up, using my own laptop to orchestrate my downfall, was a chilling testament to his ruthlessness. The realization had hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless and reeling. The drive home from the station was a blur of muted colors and a suffocating silence. The familiar streets of Portland, usually a comforting sight, now seemed to mock me with their normalcy. The rain had softened to a persistent drizzle, mirroring the dull ache in my chest. Each drop seemed to magnify the gnawing sense of injustice. Liam was at Rachel's, a small mercy, a brief respite from the constant fear that was now my unwelcome companion. The house, when I finally pulled into the driveway, looked different, sinister almost. The porch light, usually a warm beacon, seemed to cast longer, more menacing shadows. It felt less like a haven and more like a cage, a place where I was constantly exposed, vulnerable. I didn't go inside immediately. Instead, I parked my truck down the street a few houses away, where the old oak tree offered a thick canopy of shadow. The engine ticked softly, its fading warmth the only comfort in the chilly evening air. I just sat there, slumped low in the driver's seat, watching my house, my home, my sanctuary. It felt alien now, tainted by the events of the past few days. The windows, usually a welcoming glow, were dark, reflecting the gloomy sky. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a prickling sensation that crawled up my spine. My gaze swept over the familiar contours of the porch, the overgrown rose bushes, the sagging fence that I'd always meant to fix. And then I saw it. A shadow, deeper than the encroaching twilight, detached itself from the dense foliage bordering my property. It moved slowly, deliberately, a dark silhouette against the muted grays and browns of the evening. It wasn't a neighbor, not with that unnatural stillness, that predatory grace. My breath hitched, a sudden sharp intake of cold air. My hands instinctively tightened on the steering wheel, my knuckles white, a primal alarm blaring in my head. The figure lingered for a moment, unnaturally still, as if observing, assessing. My eyes, strained and burning, focused on it, trying to discern details in the fading light. It was tall, lean, and seemed to possess a certain predatory alertness, an unnerving sense of purpose. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the sudden, suffocating silence of the truck cabin. The figure moved again, a swift, fluid motion that was almost imperceptible. It vanished, blending seamlessly back into the dense shadows of the trees at the edge of my yard, leaving behind only the lingering scent of damp earth and the ghost of its unsettling presence. My breath escaped in a shaky gasp I hadn't realized I was holding. Was I imagining things? The exhaustion, the stress, it was playing tricks on my mind. But the prickling sensation on my skin, the ice-cold dread in my gut, told me otherwise. It felt too real, too deliberate to be a hallucination. Ethan. My mind immediately jumped to him. Was he sending someone to watch me? To intimidate me? Or worse? The paranoia was a bitter taste on my tongue, coating everything in a layer of suspicion. The next day, Rachel met me at a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town. The scent of roasted beans filled the air, a fleeting comfort. Her eyes, usually so clear and kind, were clouded with concern as I recounted what I'd seen. She listened intently, her fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on her ceramic mug. "It might be one of Ethan's thugs, Dan," she said, her voice low, cautious. "He's got a reputation for hiring muscle when he wants to send a message." My gut twisted, a fresh wave of nausea washing over me. Ethan was playing a dangerous game, escalating far beyond just stealing money. Was he still watching? Was this a warning, or a prelude to something far worse? The image of the shadowy figure lurking in the darkness flashed in my mind, sending a shiver down my spine. My stomach clenched, a cold knot tightening with each passing second. The possibility that Ethan was still watching us, still orchestrating things from the shadows, was a terrifying thought. Liam. My son was safe with Rachel, but for how long? The world outside, once predictable, now felt filled with unseen threats, lurking just beyond my sight. I felt a profound weariness settle over me, heavy and suffocating. The constant vigilance was draining, eroding what little peace I had left. My eyes darted around the coffee shop, scrutinizing every face, every shadow, searching for another pair of eyes watching me. The paranoia was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, tainting every thought. Later that night, the house felt even more hostile, a hollow shell echoing with my fear. I had managed to coax Liam into bed, his small face still etched with the lingering worry of my arrest. The rain had picked up again, a soft, relentless patter against the windows, a soundtrack to my growing unease. I was just about to turn off the living room light when I saw it. A small folded piece of paper, stark white against the dark wood of the front door, slipped underneath. My breath hitched. It hadn't been there moments ago. My hand trembled as I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the cold, damp paper. I unfolded the note, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The words, scrawled in an unfamiliar, jagged hand, were stark and chilling. "Stop or Liam pays." My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. Liam. The name, my son's name, scrawled in black ink, felt like a direct punch to the gut. The world seemed to shrink around me, the walls closing in, the air suddenly thin and suffocating. Who was pulling these strings? Was this Ethan's doing, a twisted escalation of his threats? Or was it someone worse, a shadowy figure from his murky world of gambling debts and illicit dealings? The note was a new, terrifying dimension to this nightmare, a direct threat to the one person I would die to protect. The paper trembled in my shaking hand, its simple words promising a terror I couldn't comprehend. The chilling note, "Stop or Liam pays," was a cold, hard slap to the face, echoing in the suffocating silence of my living room. It transformed my fear into a raw, burning terror. The shadowy figure I'd seen lurking outside my house, the explicit threat against my son, it was all part of Ethan's twisted game. His audacity, his relentless cruelty, knew no bounds. He wasn't just after my money or my reputation, he was trying to break me, to destroy the one thing I held most precious. My hands had trembled as I clutched the note, the flimsy paper feeling like a heavy stone. The air, already thick with unspoken anxieties, now felt choked with an invisible menace. Every shadow seemed to stretch, to twist into menacing shapes. I spent a sleepless night, Liam's soft breaths from his room the only anchor in a storm of horrifying possibilities. My mind raced, trying to anticipate Ethan's next move, trying to find a crack in his impenetrable facade. The rage simmered, a low, dangerous growl in my gut, mixing with the icy grip of fear. I couldn't run. There was nowhere to go that he couldn't reach, not if he was willing to threaten Liam. I had to fight back, not with my fists, but with cunning, with precision. The memory of my father's cryptic note, "Protect what's yours, look closer," echoed in my mind. It wasn't just about finding the truth, it was about laying a trap. The next morning, the exhaustion was a heavy cloak, weighing down my every movement. I dropped Liam off at Rachel's, forcing a smile that felt brittle and fake. Her eyes, filled with quiet understanding, spoke volumes. She knew I was teetering on the edge. "Be careful, Dan," she murmured, squeezing my arm, her touch a fleeting comfort. Her words echoed in the quiet hum of my truck as I drove away. I was no longer just a victim. I was a hunter, albeit a reluctant one, forced into a deadly game by my own family. My mind was a whirlwind of half-formed plans, each one dissolving as quickly as it appeared. I needed help, real help, someone who understood how Ethan operated, someone who wasn't afraid to go up against him. My thoughts kept returning to the detective at the station, the one who had laid out the evidence against me with such a detached, almost clinical precision. Jake Miller. He'd had a look in his eyes, a flicker of something beyond routine procedure, when he talked about the kind of people who orchestrated these elaborate financial schemes. It was a long shot, but I was out of options. I found Detective Miller at his desk, surrounded by stacks of files, the air in his small office thick with the scent of old coffee and stale paper. He looked up, his expression unreadable when I explained my situation, the threats against Liam, the transfer slip with Ethan's signature. His eyes, sharp and assessing, never left my face. He listened, silent, as I recounted the entire nightmare, from Liam on the porch to Clara's warning text, to the shadowy figure, and finally, the note. When I finished, the silence in the room stretched, heavy and taut, broken only by the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, deliberate movement, and ran a hand over his tired face. "Ethan Brooks," he mused, his voice low, almost a growl. "He's always been too slippery, too good at covering his tracks." A glint of something cold, something almost personal, flickered in his eyes. "He got my brother years back. A bad investment, or so they said, but I always knew it was more." My breath hitched. A grudge, a personal stake. This wasn't just a random detective anymore. This was an ally, an unexpected, dangerous ally. He looked at me, his gaze firm. "Let's catch him red-handed." The words were a lifeline thrown to me in a raging sea. My shoulders, which had been hunched with the weight of despair, straightened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of hope, cold and resolute, ignited within me. "How?" I asked, my voice a strained whisper, raw with desperation and the burgeoning resolve. He pushed a small, almost invisible device across his desk, a hidden microphone. "We plant this in his car," he explained, his voice low and precise. "He's arrogant. He'll talk. They always do." The plan was simple, terrifyingly so. It relied on Ethan's arrogance, his need to boast, to prove his dominance. My hands, which had been trembling with fear, now shook with a nervous energy, a burgeoning anticipation. We meticulously planned the logistics, the timing, the best way to get close enough to his car without alerting him. The surveillance van, a nondescript vehicle with tinted windows, would be our base, parked in a discreet location, a silent observer in the shadows. The thought of being so close to Ethan, of hearing his voice, filled me with a perverse mixture of dread and grim satisfaction. I imagined his smug face, twisting in anger as his carefully constructed world began to unravel. Waiting was agonizing. Every minute stretched into an eternity. The small, claustrophobic interior of the surveillance van smelled of stale coffee and electronic equipment. My eyes were glued to the monitor, a grainy black and white feed of Ethan's car parked in front of his flashy downtown office building. The city sounds outside were muted, distant, swallowed by the focused intensity of our vigil. Jake sat beside me, his presence a quiet, reassuring anchor in the churning storm of my anxiety. He was calm, collected, a stark contrast to the frantic beat of my own heart. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ethan appeared. He swaggered out of the building, his phone pressed to his ear, his posture radiating a smug confidence that made my blood boil. He got into his car, the engine purring to life, and then a faint crackle through the headphones I wore. Static, then his voice, clear and infuriatingly arrogant. He was talking to someone, a business associate, I assumed. Then the words that sent a jolt of ice and fire through my veins. He was bragging about framing me, about how easy it had been to transfer the money, to make it look like my own doing, about how clueless I was, how he'd pulled the wool over everyone's eyes. The trap was working. He was walking right into it. The smugness in his voice, the thinly veiled contempt, fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. This was about justice, about showing him and Clara and my mother that they couldn't get away with this. But a new thought, cold and insidious, crept into my mind as I listened to his brazen confession. Would Ethan slip up, caught in his own web of deceit? Or was he still too smart, too cunning to be truly caught? Could he somehow turn this against us, double-cross us before we even had a chance to react? The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through me, tightening its grip around my chest. Ethan's voice, captured through the hidden mic, was a venomous whisper in my ear, his casual boasts about framing me, about my cluelessness, a sickening confirmation of his calculated cruelty. The rage, cold and steady, had solidified into a fierce resolve. Jake Miller, silent beside me in the surveillance van, had offered a grim nod, his eyes mirroring my grim determination. The trap was sprung. Ethan was walking right into it, but the chilling question lingered. Could he still twist this, somehow turn the tables before we had a chance to react? The thought sent a jolt of anxiety through me, a raw, exposed nerve. Every minute that stretched felt like an eternity, ticking down to an inevitable confrontation. The air in the van had been thick with anticipation, the hum of the equipment a low thrum beneath the pounding of my heart. I'd imagined Ethan's face, contorted in anger, his smugness finally stripped away. That image, dark as it was the fuel that kept me going, that kept the terror at bay. I had spent countless nights since Liam's abandonment replaying every conversation, every subtle glance, every interaction with Ethan and Clara, searching for the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. And now, the cracks were starting to show. It was a Monday afternoon, a few days after we'd planted the bug. The phone rang, a jarring sound in the quiet of my living room. I glanced at the caller ID, my breath catching in my throat. Clara, my sister. My hand hovered over the phone, my fingers trembling. The memory of her chilling text, "Stop digging, Dan, it's for the best," flashed in my mind, a stark reminder of her complicity. But something else surfaced too, an older memory, softer, more conflicted. I remembered a time years ago when Liam was just a toddler. Ethan had been in one of his moods, a dark, simmering anger that had erupted over something trivial. Liam, startled by the raised voices, had started to cry, a thin, frightened wail. Ethan's face had contorted, a flicker of something ugly in his eyes. And Clara, without a word, had scooped Liam up, shielding his tiny body with her own, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored my own. She had taken him into the next room, murmuring soft comforts, her back a defiant barrier between her nephew and her volatile husband. The memory was a stark contrast to the indifferent laughter I'd heard from behind the frosted glass door. Could there be a flicker of that protective sister, that caring aunt, left inside her? I took a deep breath, the stale air scratching at my throat, and answered, "Clara?" My voice was hoarse, strained. Her voice on the other end was rough, raw, choked with something that sounded suspiciously like tears. "Dan," she sobbed, the sound like a rusty hinge. I can't live with this anymore." My heart leaped, a frantic, cautious flutter. This? Was she talking about the theft, the frame-up, Liam being left in the rain? A million questions swirled, but I held my tongue, letting her speak, letting her unravel. The silence on my end was a deliberate choice, a careful space for her to fill. "Ethan, he's out of control," she continued, her voice trembling, punctuated by shaky breaths. "The gambling, it's worse than ever. He's losing everything. He's going to take us all down with him." My grip tightened on the phone, my knuckles white. Gambling debts. It all clicked into place, the missing piece of the puzzle, the stolen $927,000. It wasn't just about controlling me, it was about feeding his addiction, his insatiable hunger for money, for risk. The realization was a cold, hard stone in my gut. I have something," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper, as if she feared Ethan would materialize out of thin air to silence her. "Proof." A rush of adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. Proof. It was what Jake and I needed. It was what could turn this nightmare around. "Meet me," I said, my voice low and urgent, overriding the tremor in my own hands. "Where?" She gave me an address, a quiet, dimly lit side street near the old industrial district, far from prying eyes. "Tonight. Midnight." The connection clicked off, leaving me with the lingering sound of her desperate sobs and the thrum of my own racing heart. Midnight arrived, shrouded in a thin, swirling mist that clung to the cold Portland air. The street Clara had chosen was deserted, the only light emanating from a single flickering street lamp casting long, dancing shadows. My breath plumed in the frigid air as I waited, tucked into the dark recesses of my truck, the engine off, the silence broken only by the drip of moisture from the old factory roofs. Every nerve ending felt raw, exposed. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my fingers ached. Was this a genuine act of remorse? Or was it another one of Ethan's twisted games, a trap designed to lure me into a vulnerable position? The uncertainty gnawed at me, a relentless anxiety. A small, dark sedan pulled up, its headlights cutting through the mist like ghostly eyes. Clara. She was alone. She stepped out, her figure hunched, her shoulders trembling, even in the faint light. Her face, usually so composed, was pale and drawn, streaked with tears. She looked utterly broken. My chest tightened with a strange mixture of pity and resentment. She had been complicit, had stood by while Liam suffered, while I was framed. But now, seeing her so utterly defeated, a sliver of that old connection, that shared history, tugged at something deep within me. She walked quickly to my truck, her footsteps muffled by the damp asphalt. Her hand, shaking visibly, held out a worn leather-bound ledger. It was thick, heavy, its pages filled with neat columns of numbers and dates. "This is it," she whispered, her voice raw, barely audible above the faint murmur of the mist. "Ethan's gambling debts, every single one, and the dates of the transfers, they match your savings." My eyes widened. This was it, the smoking gun. It detailed the systematic draining of my account, correlating directly with his escalating gambling losses. The cold, hard evidence laid bare his desperation, his deceit. "I can't live with this, Dan," she sobbed, her voice cracking, the words a desperate plea for absolution. Her shoulders slumped, and she hugged herself, as if trying to hold herself together. Her gaze, when it met mine, was filled with a raw, agonizing remorse. My chest tightened. It was a genuine breakdown, an emotional unraveling that was impossible to fake. Then she pulled out her phone, her thumb fumbling with the screen. And this, she said, her voice a little stronger, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. She pressed play. Ethan's voice, clear and infuriatingly arrogant, filled the small space of the truck cabin. He was talking to someone, a low-level contact from the underworld of his gambling debts, his voice dripping with condescension as he explained how he'd framed me, how he'd made it look like I was the one siphoning off funds, how he'd even managed to get my IP address for the transactions. It was a detailed, brazen confession. Clara had recorded him. The twist was sudden, sharp, exhilarating. She had betrayed Ethan. She had turned the tide. I stared at her, the phone still playing Ethan's damning confession, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. Surprise, cautious trust, and a flicker of something akin to pity. Could Clara's betrayal of Ethan truly save us? Or would this reckless act cost her everything, plunging her deeper into the very darkness she so desperately sought to escape? The answer hung in the chilly night air, shrouded in mist and uncertainty, a new, complex layer to the already tangled web of our family's betrayal. Clara's desperate confession, her raw sobs, and the incriminating ledger in her shaking hand had been a revelation. Then Ethan's voice, smug and self-assured, detailing his crimes on the recording she'd made. It was all the proof we needed. My sister, torn between loyalty and a burgeoning conscience, had chosen to betray her husband, risking everything to right a terrible wrong. The twist was sharp, unexpected, cutting through the layers of fear and despair that had clung to me. Her act of defiance, however small, had ignited a fragile flicker of hope within me. The cold mist of the Portland night had wrapped around us as she slipped away, leaving me with the weighty ledger and the chilling audio. The momentum had shifted. The pieces were falling into place. The air in my house felt thick with a quiet tension in the days that followed. Liam, sensing the shift, was a little brighter, a little less withdrawn, his small smiles a precious balm to my frayed nerves. I spent hours with Jake, listening to Ethan's confession again and again, meticulously planning our next move. The detective's grim satisfaction was palpable, a quiet echo of my own. We had the evidence. We had the motive. Now we needed the stage. The family dinner, a forced annual ritual at my mother's sprawling suburban home, provided the perfect opportunity. It was a place where appearances were everything, where secrets were buried deep under layers of polite smiles and carefully rehearsed pleasantries. It was the ideal place to expose the ugly truth. The day of the dinner arrived, cloaked in a deceptive brightness. The Portland sky was a pale blue, and a weak sun attempted to pierce through the lingering chill in the air. My truck hummed under me as I drove, the engine's steady thrum a counterpoint to the frantic beating of my heart. Liam was with Rachel, safe, far from the explosion I knew was coming. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The thought of confronting them, of shattering the carefully constructed illusion of my family, sent a shiver through me. But the memory of Liam on the porch, trembling and alone, banished any lingering hesitation. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about reclaiming what was ours. My mother's house loomed ahead, a grand, imposing structure with manicured lawns and an air of quiet prosperity that masked the rot within. Cars lined the driveway, familiar models belonging to aunts, uncles, cousins, the usual gathering of a family that prided itself on its cohesion, its perfect image. The scent of roasted turkey and cranberry sauce, usually comforting, now felt cloying, a suffocating sweetness. I walked through the ornate front door, the heavy oak swinging inward with a soft groan, revealing the familiar scene. Laughter, chatter, the clinking of glasses. My stomach clenched. Ethan was there, of course, holding court by the fireplace, his laughter too loud, his charm too practiced. He caught my eye, and a quick, dismissive smirk flickered across his face, a silent taunt. Clara was in the kitchen, her back to me, moving with a hesitant stiffness. My mother, impeccably dressed, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, was circulating among the guests, a queen in her meticulously crafted kingdom. The air vibrated with unspoken tensions, a subtle undercurrent beneath the veneer of familial harmony. Dinner was served, a lavish spread laid out on the long mahogany dining table, gleaming under the warm glow of the chandelier. The conversation flowed, light and superficial, a delicate dance around the unspoken. My mother asked about my carpentry business, her tone laced with a patronizing concern. My aunt inquired about Liam, her eyes full of a genuine, if fleeting, sympathy. I answered vaguely, my mind fixed on the task at hand, the phone clutched in my pocket, the audio file a burning weight against my thigh. Ethan, seated across from me, was regaling everyone with a self-aggrandizing story about a recent successful investment, his gaze meeting mine with a triumphant gleam. He was playing his role perfectly, the charming, successful family man. I cleared my throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the momentary lull in conversation. Every eye turned to me. Ethan's smirk faltered just a fraction. "Actually," I began, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "Ethan, your latest investment is precisely what I wanted to talk about." A ripple of confused murmurs ran through the table. My mother's eyebrows, perfectly arched, furrowed slightly. Ethan's eyes narrowed, a flash of irritation crossing his face. I pulled out my phone, the small device suddenly feeling monumental in my hand. My thumb hovered over the play button, my heart hammering against my ribs. Ethan's eyes, usually so confident, flickered with a sudden dawning comprehension, a hint of alarm. "What are you doing, Daniel?" he asked, his voice losing its smooth edge, a faint tremor entering it. I ignored him. I pressed play. Ethan's voice, clear and undeniably arrogant, filled the elegant dining room. His carefully constructed facade shattered as his recorded words, boasting about stealing my money and framing me, echoed through the suddenly silent room. The clinking of cutlery stopped. Gasps rippled through the assembled family. Aunts clutched their pearls, uncles cursed under their breath, their faces contorted in a mixture of shock and disbelief. The air was thick with the stench of their unraveling lies. My mother's face, usually so composed, paled, her mouth agape. Clara, who had been sitting rigidly beside Ethan, slumped forward, her face buried in her hands. Ethan's smugness faded, replaced by a desperate, panicked flicker in his eyes. He lunged for my phone, but I pulled it back, my hand steady. "You're done, Ethan," I said, my voice low, firm, each word a hammer blow. His lies, years of them, unraveled before their eyes, exposed by his own damning voice. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint, muffled sound of Ethan's continued confession from the phone. The shock rippled through the room, a collective gasp, and then, as if on cue, the front door burst open, crashing against the wall with a thunderous thud. 2 uniformed police officers, followed by Jake Miller, strode into the dining room, their presence stark and uncompromising against the elegant backdrop. Cuffs clicked, sharp and metallic, on Ethan's wrists, pulling him roughly from his chair. He struggled, a desperate, animalistic cry tearing from his throat, but it was useless. The room went silent. Utterly, completely silent. My mother stared, her face a mask of horror. Clara sobbed, her body racked with tremors, the triumph sharp and cold, mixed with a profound sense of exhaustion. With Ethan gone, what would the family do next? The question hung in the charged air, heavy with uncertainty, promising a future as unpredictable as the past. The silence that had fallen over my mother's dining room after Ethan's arrest was not a peaceful one. It was heavy, choked with shattered illusions and the brittle remnants of a family torn asunder. My mother's face, pale and ashen, had been a mask of horror, her perfectly coiffed hair suddenly looking disheveled, out of place. Clara's sobs racking her body had been the only sound besides the receding sirens of the police cars. The raw triumph I'd felt at exposing Ethan was quickly replaced by a profound exhaustion, a weariness that settled deep into my bones. With Ethan gone, what would the family do next? The question had lingered in the charged air, heavy with uncertainty, promising a future as unpredictable as the past. In the weeks that followed, the immediate aftermath was a strange blend of quiet relief and lingering unease. The news of Ethan's arrest rippled through the extended family, sparking hushed conversations and averted gazes at the grocery store. My phone, once bombarded with Ethan's indirect threats or Clara's desperate pleas, now remained mostly silent, a heavy void that sometimes felt like peace, sometimes like abandonment. Liam, still shaken from the events, clung to me more fiercely than usual. His eyes, though less frightened, still held a shadow of the confusion and hurt he'd experienced. He was healing, slowly, but the scars were there, subtle but present. The house, my home, felt lighter, less oppressive, without the constant threat of Ethan's influence. But it still bore the marks of neglect, the faded paint, the creaking floorboards, the general wear that had accumulated over years of being stretched thin by work and worry. It was a tangible reflection of the turmoil we had endured. One crisp autumn morning, a weak sun filtering through the perpetually overcast Portland sky, I found myself standing in the living room, a paintbrush in hand. The familiar scent of fresh paint, sharp and clean, filled the air, a stark contrast to the musty smell that had permeated the house for too long. It was time to reclaim our space, to physically manifest the healing we so desperately needed. I started with the living room, the heart of our home, the place where Liam spent most of his time playing. The roller moved smoothly over the old, dingy walls, replacing the faded beige with a soft, warm cream, a color that promised new beginnings. The repetitive motion was meditative, a quiet ritual of renewal. The rhythmic swish of the brush against the wall, the faint drip-drip of paint from the tray, filled the silence, pushing away the lingering echoes of past betrayals. Liam, bless his resilient heart, joined me. He carefully held a small, child-sized paintbrush, his tongue poking out in concentration as he mimicked my strokes on a section of the lower wall, his small, careful movements bringing a newfound lightness to the task. His giggles, soft and melodic, echoed in the freshly painted room, a sound more beautiful than any symphony. His smile, no longer tentative, was a full, unrestrained burst of joy, returning like the sun after a long, dark storm. One afternoon, a few weeks into our quiet renovation, there was a tentative knock on the door. My heart gave a little jump, a phantom echo of past anxieties. I opened it to find Clara standing on the porch, a small, worn bag clutched in her hands. Her eyes were still shadowed, her face pale, but there was a quiet dignity to her posture that I hadn't seen in years. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with the heavy weight of our shared history and the gaping chasm of her betrayal. I simply waited, my hands loose at my sides, my expression unreadable. "Dan," she began, her voice a fragile whisper, barely audible above the faint rustle of dry leaves in the autumn wind. She pushed the bag toward me. I wanted to give you this." I took it, my fingers brushing against the soft, worn leather. It felt familiar, too familiar. I opened it. Inside, neatly stacked, were wads of cash. Not the full $927,000, but a significant portion. A wave of complicated emotions washed over me. Surprise, a flicker of gratitude, but mostly a deep-seated weariness. This was the money Ethan had given her, the crumbs from his lavish betrayal, perhaps. "It's not all of it," she continued, her voice catching. "But it's what I had. It's for Liam, and I'm so sorry, Dan." Her voice was raw, choked with genuine remorse, and her shoulders trembled, a familiar tremor that spoke of deep, agonizing regret. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for something, anything, akin to forgiveness. I looked at the money, then back at Clara, her face etched with a profound sorrow. The apology hung in the air, heavy and inadequate, yet utterly sincere. It wasn't a quick fix, wasn't a magic wand that could erase months of pain and betrayal, but it was a start. A first, trembling step on a long, arduous path towards something resembling healing. I merely nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. Words felt too big, too complex for the moment. My silence was not a rejection, but an acknowledgement of the enormity of what had transpired, and the long road ahead for both of us. The legal proceedings that followed Ethan's arrest were swift, almost mercifully so, given the mountain of evidence Jake and I had compiled. The court seized Ethan's remaining assets, his lavish Portland home, his luxury car, the remnants of his ill-gotten gains. The money, though not all of what was taken, was a significant sum. It was funneled into a special fund for Liam, specifically earmarked for his therapy, for the long-term emotional and psychological support he would undoubtedly need after the trauma he had endured. Peace, a fragile, tentative thing, felt possible now. It wasn't the joyous, carefree peace of a life untainted, but a hard-won calm, a quiet space carved out of chaos. The scent of fresh paint still lingered in the house, mingling with the faint aroma of Liam's favorite peanut butter and jelly sandwich. He was sitting on the newly painted living room floor, meticulously arranging his small collection of toy cars, his brow furrowed in concentration. His laughter, now more frequent, bubbled up, light and unburdened, a melody that filled the house with warmth. Could we ever be a family again? Not in the way we were before, no. That innocence was lost, shattered beyond repair. But could we build something new, something stronger, from the ashes of betrayal? The question hung in the quiet air, an unspoken prayer, a fragile hope for a future defined not by the past, but by the slow, arduous process of healing. The scent of fresh paint still lingered in the air, a clean, hopeful promise for our future. Liam's laughter, light and free, echoed through the newly revitalized rooms of our home, a melody that filled the hollow spaces where fear and despair once resided. The money recovered from Ethan's seized assets, though not every single dollar, was enough to ensure Liam's therapy, a lifeline to help him navigate the invisible scars left by the past. Peace, a fragile, hard-won commodity, had begun to settle over us. It was a peace born not of forgetting, but of resilience, of rebuilding. The question of whether we could truly be a family again, in the wake of such profound betrayal, lingered, a silent, yearning hope in my heart. In the quiet moments when Liam was asleep and the house settled into its nighttime hum, my mind often drifted back to my father, his cryptic note found in the dusty attic. "Protect what's yours. Look closer." At the time, it had been a desperate plea for guidance, a fragile thread in the darkness. Now, it felt like a quiet affirmation, a testament to his foresight, his enduring love. He had known, somehow, about the shadows lurking within our family, about the dangers that would one day emerge. His wisdom, delivered from beyond the grave, had guided me through the darkest days, a silent mentor in my unexpected battle. He had taught me, long before all this began, the true meaning of protection, not just of wealth, but of spirit, of family. Weeks blurred into months. The days settled into a comfortable rhythm, a gentle hum of normalcy that I hadn't known in years. Liam flourished, his small body gaining back the weight he'd lost, his eyes sparkling with an innocent joy that healed parts of me I didn't know were broken. His laughter, once tentative, now filled the house with an unburdened sound that was music to my ears. He loved helping me in the small garden I'd started in the backyard, his tiny fingers carefully pressing seeds into the rich, dark soil. It was a slow, deliberate process of growth, much like our own healing. One evening, as the last rays of the sun cast long, golden streaks across the living room, Liam came to me, a small, worn blue bear clutched tightly in his hand. It was an old toy, one he'd had since he was a baby, its fur matted and faded from countless hugs. He had carried it with him the night he was left on the porch, a silent witness to his abandonment. Now he walked over to the fireplace mantel, its surface gleaming with a fresh coat of polish. With a careful, almost reverent gesture, he placed the bear there, right in the center, a sentinel watching over us. He looked at me, a small, knowing smile on his face, then turned and scampered off to play. I watched him go, a profound sense of warmth spreading through my chest. The bear, once a symbol of his pain, was now a symbol of our fight, of our resilience. Justice wasn't loud, wasn't a triumphant shout. It was this. It was Liam's unburdened laughter. It was his small, confident gesture of placing that bear on the mantel, reclaiming his narrative, his future. It was the quiet, steady beat of our everyday life, rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. The house, once cold and filled with the ghost of past hurts, now glowed with warmth, bathed in the soft, fading light of the setting sun. And then, a soft knock on the door. I opened it to see Clara standing there, a small bouquet of vibrant, freshly cut flowers in her hands. Her eyes met mine, no longer shadowed by guilt, but filled with a quiet humility. Her face, though still carrying the lines of past struggles, seemed softer, lighter. She had been seeing a therapist, working through her own complicity, her own regrets. "Just wanted to bring these," she murmured, her voice a little stronger than I remembered, yet still tinged with a delicate fragility. "For the house, for you and Liam." She didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't make grand pronouncements. She just offered a quiet gesture of amends. I took the flowers, their petals cool and soft against my fingers, and nodded. It wasn't a full reconciliation. Perhaps it never would be. But it was a fragile bridge, a tentative step toward rebuilding something, even if it was just a fragile truce. We had survived. More than survived. We had triumphed. The storm had threatened to break us, to consume us in its raging fury, but we had found our footing. I looked at Liam, who was now chasing fireflies in the twilight, his giggles carrying on the gentle breeze. He was safe. We were safe. Justice, I realized, wasn't just about punishment. It was about reclaiming your peace, your dignity, your life. It was about understanding that sometimes the quiet strength of resilience, the simple act of choosing joy amidst the pain, was the most powerful form of revenge. Truth sometimes heals in silence. It dismantles the lies, not with shouts, but with the quiet, unwavering power of its own existence. And in that quiet victory, I finally understood my father's full message. He hadn't just told me to protect what was mine financially, but to protect my son's spirit, our peace, our future. That night, as Liam finally drifted off to sleep, nestled securely in his bed, I stood by his window, looking out at the star-dusted sky. The wind was still, the house warm. We were okay now. We were truly okay. If you connected with Daniel's journey of resilience and justice, please show your support. Like this video, subscribe to our channel for more true stories of triumph over betrayal, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that hope can be found even in the darkest storms. Don't forget to leave a comment below with your thoughts, and click the link in the description to binge watch more stories like this one. Your engagement helps us bring more untold truths to light.